Good morning. We're talking a little bit about something called supply chains and Scor. Now, Scor is known as the supply chain operational reference model. So, Scor's basic idea is to create a single formulation for supply chain modeling so that when you're looking at things at different levels or different levels of details of supply chains, you'd be able to map it out and everybody else would be able to read your modeling very easily. So let's talk a little bit about the whole idea of supply chains. Oftentimes you've heard it, but let's discuss it briefly for a quick bit. The supply chain itself is driven by supplier processes and customer processes. When supply drives a supply chain, which is production drives it or forecasting drives it, it's called a push model. When customer demand drives a supply chain, which is you only build to meet customer demand, it's called a pull supply chain. So in the process, the supplier processes and the customer processes comes planning, whether it's pull or push. If this way, it's push. If this way, it would be pull. You plan, so it's also known as customers, so a pull process is also known as build to demand. So build to demand versus this is build to stock. Now, once you've started planning it, then what you start doing is from the supplier side, you start sourcing it. Then you produce, then you deliver through some kind of distribution logistics. Between sourcing and making is inbound logistics. Between making and delivery is outbound logistics. Then comes, once the customer uses it, the end product is therefore sent back to return, either for parts or for disposal. It's also called obsolescence. Which is basically the end of a product and how to make sure that at the end of a product life cycle you can push the product back into the system. So these processes, you're seeing information flow happen across all of them. So information flow needs to be ensured beyond product flow. Perhaps product flow may or may not happen, but information flow happens all the time. The better you have in terms of information, the better you're going to be doing in the process. Now, supply chains are everywhere. Let's look at healthcare and pharmaceuticals, and this is one that is possibly a bit dire, mainly because it's also fraught with loads of vulnerabilities and difficulties that we have to manage. This is an example of a pharmaceutical supply chain with some vulnerabilities, and this is exactly how things go wrong. So this is the manufacturing side, distribution side, consumer, and this would be your supplier and your producer basis. So raw materials being sourced, a fake raw material enters the heparin supply chains associated with adverse effects including deaths. This compound, with one single fake compound sourced from somewhere in the world, ingredients from unknown sources sold as if made from approved plants, they all get into this active ingredients, which is your drug compounds. There's some inactive ingredients such as toxic flake glycerin sold through brokers to Panama to use for cough syrup, at least 878 dye. They both get mixed together to create a final product. So you're getting things possibly from some part of the world, something else coming in from some other place, being mixed together in some place, or being pilfered, or being to a certain degree adulterated. Then it goes into nutritional and wholesale retailers and smaller wholesalers. So in this case, Epogen is being relabeled by a counterfeiter to resemble a higher strength, enters the distribution channel and reaches patients. Now, Stolen insulin later appears at chain pharmacies in 3 states. Patients start reporting poor blood sugar counts. Now, this hits hospitals, patients, and then suddenly you see that Medicare drugs are dispensed to patients and resold into distribution. Now, this is a true case. But this is exactly how a single supply chain issue, a single product vulnerability, can affect an entire supply chain. So, regardless of how we think of where we get our products from, supply chains are everywhere. The UPS person to your postal service, to your grocery store, to your organic supply, we are all living and dying with and by supply chains and with and by their vulnerabilities. So going on with military, that's a huge part. There are wars won and lost based on supply chains. If you ever think of it, the very fact that something like during the Second World War, the entire idea of the German U-boats was to make sure that provisions didn't reach England from Canada and the United States. The U-boats, not Atlantic Fleet's main job, was to destroy every single supply convoy. Their idea was not to destroy military convoys, but general shipping lanes. Close the shipping lanes, let England starve, because Europe otherwise was conquered by or already invaded and occupied by the Nazis. You'll see the same thing when the Nazis started losing their battlefront in Operation Barbarossa, which is the invasion of Russia, where supply couldn't reach the soldiers, and whether you're talking about everything from toilet papers to weapons to ammunition to warm clothing to food to rations, if they don't reach them, things go berserk. You can have the most disciplined soldier, but the most disciplined soldier cannot do if you do not have the general amenities ready for them when they need it. So the same thing happens with military. You see that now in this case we're going to be talking about a little bit about something called an RFID supply chain in order to increase transparency. So RFID stands for radio frequency ID tagging. It's nothing but a very small chip put into any kind of a container or a pallet or a product that allow you to sort of relay a signal constantly to know where the product is, and that's all that it is. So you'll find that in this case the military supply chain is getting very, very keen on using or finding timely and accurate data, just the way we mentioned that information flow is paramount, where items and pallets are being labeled with a passive RFID tags and then sent from manufacturers and suppliers. Whenever a shipment is changed, a new RFID tag is created so that you know who's changed what in a system. You might find this helpful as you do your projects. Now, once item cases pallets are read and they're received, they're automatically added into procurement and inventory, then verified for accuracy at the depots and distribution centers. The captured shipment information is inputted to the automated information system. Anytime the systems enter any kind of port, perhaps some ports are dodgy, some ports are safe, you're automatically being associated with the active RFID to make sure that there's in-transit visibility or transparency. The items, pallets and cases are received automatically with few disputes. If anything goes wrong, all reconfiguration require a new ID tag, which basically means something happened here, allows the DOT or the FBI or customs to particularly check things where things have been reconfigured or things have been replaced or changed. The transportation supply theatre depots data and timely are timely and accurate by a network of link readers. You're looking at something called asset visibility across the entire supply chain. And then customers have visibility of what they're including military structures. They know exactly where things are coming from, if things have been changed as it reaches the system. The same thing happens with food. The traditional supply chain typically used to be, you know, research centers, loads of chemical and pesticide companies, seed companies. They would provide all these bits to farmers who would cultivate the land and plant things. They would send their harvest into processing units. They would create certain products that would be packaged, send them to retailers, and then the end users, which might be, you know, large grocery chains, or directly as a farm to market set up like a farmer's market, or a farm to table set up like a restaurant, and that's where we would consume them. In this case, we're talking a little bit about the sustainability part, where under land and planting, you're doing better land management, so knowing what to grow, when to grow, making sure that there's proper nitrogen fixing bacteria in the process. You're not only doing crop rotation, but you're also making sure that the land itself is fertile, and there are different parts of the land where you can plant different things over time. Reduce deforestation. Your processing units in a sustainable food supply chain, you're looking at lower pollution, better hygiene, more training. Under products, making sure that you're creating a green label and following the procedures for it. Safe and sustainable packaging. Retailers, you're trying to reduce discrepancies in supply and demand, which means information flow and transparency becomes very important. Lower pollution. End users, you're giving them the preference in product selection. For example, if you're following a certain type of diet, or an organic form of existence, you can choose what you want to, and you're building customer trust. The reverse supply chain begins with biological degradation, where you're trying to segregate different waste from organic waste, non-organic waste, creating composting sets. Waste distribution, on the other side, also comes from the choice of biological nutrients for your land and plants. You're choosing the right type of fertilizer, oftentimes non-toxic fertilizer. Other uses from recycling. Going back to the fact that supply chains are everywhere, this is how we are set up right now. The losses from changes in our supply chain. The supply chain is everything, whether we are passengers when we're flying from here to there. We are also a part of the supply chain, because we're flying in not only ourselves as a part of the supply chain, but also products and cargo that's flying with us. So you'll find that there are huge losses if even as part of a supply chain were to break down. If you remember, I think in 2015 or 2016, there was a longshoremen's strike just outside the ports in California. And just because of the longshoremen's strike, no ship, or all the cargo containers in the ship, none of them was being, unloaded back onto the ports, which meant that millions and millions of tons of food and pharmaceutical products were just perishing while on these container ships, and the losses were tremendous. So you'll see that airline strikes in France, 300 million, train strikes in Germany, 370 million in terms of cost, airline strikes in Germany, 198 million, general strikes in Belgium, $1 billion. You've got natural disasters, drought in Brazil, creating loads of problems where suddenly all the things you were expecting as food coming in through Brazil, from Brazil, are suddenly being affected. Tropical cyclones, something like Fukushima disaster suddenly creates a big disruption in the supply chain. Weather changes, flooding in Pakistan and India, creating huge issues. Different parts of the world creating loads of other problems. You've got drugs coming in from Canada that are open to pilferage and changes. You've got child labour issues in Haiti. You've got cargo theft in Puerto Rico. You've got cargo theft and counterfeiters in Colombia. You're seeing drug smuggling rackets going through Argentina, Brazil, and Dominican Republic. You've got all these protesters in Mexico, and they're hijacking all different sets and creating problems. You've got drugs coming in, sometimes counterfeit, through Dominican Republic. You're seeing child labour in places like Haiti having to work. You're seeing droughts in Sao Paulo, changing things. And the most common commodities in unmanifested cargo introduction, which are the UMCs. So unmanifested cargo introduction basically means it's not very well billed and not very transparent. You really don't know what is coming in, through where and when. You see, consumer goods, and these are you don't know what is going on there. So about 30% of consumer goods are basically, to a certain degree, undocumented. 20.5% of agriculture, food and beverage undocumented. 15.4% of industrial materials and machinery undocumented. You really don't know what goes into the cargo containers and so forth. Apparel, 6.4% undocumented. You see, not moving towards Africa, Europe and Asia, you see the same issue. You've got cargo theft in Germany. You're seeing strikes in Belgium, cargo thefts all over the place. UMC drugs and environmental issues in China. You're looking at pollution issues. You're looking at methamphetamine shipments from Malaysia. You're looking at cargo thefts and weapons coming in through India. You're seeing groups like ISIS doing oil smuggling and create terrorism. You're looking at terrorist flows too as they are moving into Europe through these areas and then creating havoc in different places and disrupting life and processes and living in general. So supply chain challenges are many. So top challenges facing a company's supply chains right now. The first one is aligning operations to real-time fluctuation in customer demand. If you don't know exactly what customers demand, you're going to end up building based on forecasting, and if customer preferences change, a lot of what you've created is just going to be wasted as sunk cost, or else is going to lie to waste as inventory. Supply performance in terms of risks, reliability and quality. You need to manage risk, you need to increase reliability, you need to increase quality. Ensuring sufficient supplier capacity to meet demand. So when there is demand, you need to be able to actually manage both demand spikes and demand lulls. Lack of information and material visibility, which is very important. Skilled talent to manage supply chain execution and planning. Inadequate technology systems for visibility, planning and execution. So these are some of the core supply chain challenges in a company today. So what Scor does is it starts creating a process framework to help manage supply chain modeling. So the Scor stands for Supply Chain Operation Modeling, and it's nothing but a process framework to deliver the well-known concepts of business process re-engineering. Re-engineering is nothing but changing a process to make it better, more efficient, and reduce costs, and to a certain degree increase information flow and transparency. Benchmarking and best practices into cross-functional framework. So standard processes that are used for that is plan, which is how you want to plan out your supply chain. Source, what do you want to source? How do you want to source it? How are you going to source it for sustainability? How are you going to make it? Where will you produce? How will you deliver it? Which is also a choice of channels. Are we going to do it online? Are you going to do it offline? Are you going to do it as omni-channel, which is doing online and offline together? How will you return things? How will you enable different groups within your system, including other suppliers, to be a part of the total puzzle. Because if your suppliers don't work with you very well, your entire process is likely to fail. Then you have standard metrics. You've got, here are some of the metrics. Perfect order fulfillment, which means every order that has been placed, there's no error in that order altogether. So if somebody the other day just purchased something from Bloomingdale's and asked them to gift wrap it and paid separately for gift wrapping, it arrived my place without a gift wrap. Now that is a miss in terms of order fulfillment. Cash to cash cycle time, which basically means from the time that you have taken money, or you've been paid to, or you've taken money and started building things, to when you actually receive money from selling your inventory over. So it is not cash to credit cycle time, but cash to cash. It's also the cash to cash conversion cycle if you've read it in accounting or operations. Cost of goods sold, order fulfillment cycle time, and you want the order fulfillment cycle time to be reduced. Then you've got standard practices, things like EDI, electronic data interchange. Then electronic data interchange in this process is nothing but your ability to create a set of series of codes that explain and show how information has been flowing from one part to another. CPFR is collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. Now, this is something called a GSI-1, but the whole idea is to integrate and collaborate across the entire supply chain so that there's joint visibility. It doesn't matter if you're a supplier, if you are a producer, if you're a distributor, everybody can see the supply chain exactly the same way. So CPFR stands for collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. Cross-training is making sure that everybody that's a part of your supply chain knows exactly what is happening, and they're educated the same way and they're trained the same way so that nothing goes awry. Sales and operations planning, which is knowing exactly how to manage your operations and sales so that you're closer to market demand and you're closer to knowing exactly. So a salesperson might say that we would like to sell you this product, and when the client says, so how long will it take for you? The salesperson cannot say, well, let me reach back to HQ and ask them. You have to be able to look in and immediately say that, you know what, I think based on what we can do as production scheduling, we can get this product fulfilled to you by the next 6 days. The better you are at specifying that, the better you are at gaining a sale. Then predefined relationships between, so the Scor also shows these predefined relationships between processes, metrics, practices, inputs, and outputs. So Scor ends up combining multiple best practices and best techniques in the process. First, Scor does business process reengineering, which captures the as-is business activity structure, and then looks at what are the issues with what we have right now, with the processes that we have right now. What processes can we change to optimize the system, to make it more efficient and to make it more effective? Then benchmark, quantify the operational performance of similar companies and establish internal targets. So these internal targets are oftentimes called KPIs, key performance indicators, and sometimes KPIs make up something called CSFs, critical success factors. Then you've got best practices analysis, which is show which practices have been consistently, the key is consistency and reliability. They have to be best practices. They can only be best practices if they provide better returns every time or consistently over time. If it's random, you don't want to convert that into a best practice. And then use the process reference framework to integrate the whole set together. So when you're looking at the Scor reference model, it looks at the whole set from suppliers, internal, external, your company, customers, internal, externals, customers and customers and consumers. You're looking at from the supplier side, delivery to sourcing, planning, making, returning, setup, sourcing, making, delivering, return, plan, source, how you source, and how you return. So your this whole thing gets into your entire planning of your Scor reference here. This is called a cow to cone, which is knowing exactly how milk from cow is turned into an ice cream cone, or rock to ring, which is how a single material such as from a diamond mine or from an amethyst mine somewhere is converted into a ring. It's not broken by organizational boundaries but by the entire supply chain process. So this is a process story, not a company story, because your company is nothing but a part of a long process. The end-to-end supply chain, therefore, is a big part of Scores. In this case, it shows all these components. In this case, you're building up an MP3 device or whatever it might be, going into sub-assemblies, which are nothing but modular pieces that are made in their own set and later assembled or integrated by the manufacturer, sent to the retailer, sent to the consumer. In this case, so supplier goes to the supplier, to the company that fabricates and assembles, to a customer's customer, which is a consumer. And the process arrow shows material direction flow, but information flow goes that way. That way you know what the customer wants, so that you know what components to get, what sub-assemblies to create, when to integrate it. It's oftentimes called postponement. You want to build things closer to the customer, so that if customer preferences change, you don't have to worry with obsolete finished goods inventory. So the Scor sets it up as a series of hierarchy. So level 1 just shows the scope, level 2 configuration, level 3 activity, level 4 workflow, and level 5 the transactions. So as you're sourcing, that's your level 1 scope. Anytime you find a number added as a suffix to the alphabet, it's now level 2. Now you see the first level of decimal points creates level 3, which is an activity, level 4, which therefore could have been S1.2.1. Level 5 would break it further, it would be S1.2.1.1. So every time you're going down the line, you're moving from general to specific, and you're moving from standards core practices to company and industry definitions. So from sourcing to stock product to the receipt of products to the sequence of activities once you receive the product to how you're converting the product transactions through EDI and XML. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It's a type of formatting to parse product and process and technological information. So level 1 differentiates the business, level 2 differentiates complexity, level 3 creates names and tasks, level 4 shows sequences and steps, and level 5 shows links and transactions. So as you're moving from defining scope to capabilities to links, metrics, job details, and automation, you need to ensure that the framework language stays the same as defined by Scor, which is you try to create a single set of framework language, and following this set, like what level it's at and what processes are you following. And finally, once it gets back within your company, then you can have your own company and industrial definitions that might actually be slightly different from standard Scor practices. So here's an example of not only the same set, but also who controls it. So all that's been added now is the controlling group, or this oftentimes is known as governance. Governance basically looks at who controls a specific part of a process, which also increases something called RACI, RACI. And RACI stands for R stands for responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. So you're trying to figure out the RACI matrix in terms of governance by knowing who's the right person who would control a certain level at both the supply chain process parameters set as well as at the company set. So typically level 1 would be controlled by any kind of CXO like a COO or a CIO, the executive VP and the senior VPs. Level 2 configuration would now, you'll see that there's a phased transition happening. The SVP and the VP, the VP goes back again, director, line manager, the line manager goes back again, team lead goes back again, individuals, programmers. You're always trying to create a transition set so that what is happening at level 1 scope isn't altogether sort of opaque at level 2. So the SVP who's involved in level 1 is also involved in level 2. The VP involved in level 2 configuration is involved in level 3 activity. The line manager involved in level 3 activity is also involved in level 4 workflow, and the team lead in level 4 flow workflow is also the person who's being able to convey and translate what's going on to level 5 transactions so that there's nothing lost in translation. So this is exactly how the governance works. And once again, RACI stands for who's responsible, A for who's accountable, C for who's consulted, and I for who's involved. So it's called a RACI matrix, and it basically shows your governance structure. Thank you guys.